Welcome back to Life's Cholent. My name is Avital, and today I am honored to have a very special guest with us, Cantor Mark Kushner, who has been a mohel for about 45 years and has had the opportunity to perform roughly 15,000 Britot. Because of all of this vast experience that he has had at these Jewish life cycle ceremonies, Cantor Kushner knows a lot about the topic of today's discussion, which is Jewish baby naming. Cantor Kushner guides us wonderfully through the process of how parents can select a name for their child, the different naming traditions within the Jewish community, the importance of a Hebrew name, and some of the significance behind a Brit Milah, the naming that happens when a baby boy is born, and a Simchat Bat, the baby naming ceremony that many people elect to have when a baby girl is born. I know that I learned so much, and I'm really excited for you to learn as well. Welcome back to Life's Cholent. My name is Avital, and today we have a very special guest with us. Cantor Mark Kushner, who has been a mohel for about 45 years, is certified as a mohel in Delaware, Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey. We are going to be talking today about Jewish baby naming primarily, and it is such an honor to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me tonight.
Thank you. Before we really get started, I'd love to hear about your background, how you became a mohel, and sort of why you decided you wanted to become one.
Well, I never wanted to become one. It was never my idea. Back in the late 70s, when I was going to cantorial school, the dean of the school said it would be a good idea if you diversified. So that was the corporate way in the late 70s. If you were General Motors, you didn't just make cars. You had finance, armament, electronics, and so on and so forth. Corporations diversified. And my dean felt that it would be a good idea to do the same. Then I would be worth more to my community and have a second stream of income. So before I went to cantorial school, I went to Jerusalem, and I apprenticed with a fourth generation mohel, Yosef Alfred. And the idea was that I was going to be a cantor and a mohel, but it went like that. And after 20 years in the same congregation, I retired my cantorial robes and just became a certified mohel strictly.
Wow, that's amazing. It's funny how life surprises you like that sometimes.
I always say you need to get on the path. You don't necessarily know where the path is going to lead, but you need to get on the path.
Definitely. Did you over time develop more of a passion for it, or did your passion remain in cantorial service and this was something that you did primarily professionally?
Both. I have a passion for both. For me, there's nothing more wonderful than listening to a good Chazan do classic cantorial work. And on the other side, being a mohel allows me to interface with young people at the happiest times of their lives. And it's extraordinary bracha to be part of that.
That's beautiful. We had a Chazan on a couple months back, and he shared with us a piece of his service. And you're right, it's very moving to have that kind of experience. If you have any recorded services that you've done, I'd love to include a clip here too. But I'm sure it's very, very beautiful.
Thank you.
And so traditionally, moving a little bit into today's topic, traditionally Jewish babies are not named right away. You know, whether the parents have a name in mind beforehand or not, it's not as though per se in the hospital they announce the name to everybody. So if you could talk a little bit about when Jewish boys and Jewish girls are named traditionally.
Well, the boy is named at his birth. So traditionally on the 8th day of the child's life. That's fairly straightforward. For the girl, in an Orthodox or even modern Orthodox setting, the baby girl is named at the next Torah reading day. So if the baby is born on a Tuesday, the next Torah reading day is Thursday morning, right? So the father would go to Minyan without the mother and child and have an aliyah, and the Torah reader, the Baal Koreh, would name the child. That's our tradition. Back in the late 60s, when egalitarianism started to catch on in Judaism, there was the advent of the Simchat Bat, sometimes called Britot, but there is no Brit here. There is no covenant. This is not a mitzvah deoraita from the Torah. So it's a Simchat Bat, rejoicing in the birth of a daughter. And that is done when the parents get around to it. Generally speaking, my advice is to do it within a few months, to stay away from the holidays. But sometimes parents let life get away from them, and they combine it with a baby's first birthday. Generally a bad idea, because 1-year-old infants do not stay still for a 20 or 25-minute ceremony. But the ceremony is much more involved, including family members and readings and singing, than is what usually takes place in the synagogue, which is having an aliyah, having a mishberach after that aliyah, naming the child, and that's the beginning and the end. Nothing wrong with it, and some people do both. You can name a child 100 times. There's nothing wrong with that.
That's very interesting. What does a Simchat Bat look like? Last week, in my interview with Rabbi Eliezer Lawrence, we spoke about what if you could expect if you've never been to a Brit Milah before. So with a Simchat Bat, what does the ceremony typically look like?
All right, so for a bris, the liturgy is set. There's a matbeach. It's the word is, the coin is stamped. It's set. So the bris ceremony, whether it's a Reform Brit or an Orthodox Brit, they're very, very similar. In the terms of a Simchat Bat, that is not so. The majority, when my wife and I were putting this ceremony together that I use, we of course studied what other people did. And everyone took the easy way out and basically took the bris ceremony and feminized it, which is exactly what we did not do. So what happens is each family gets, each participant in the family gets a booklet. And I don't know if you can see, but it's personalized to the child, both in Hebrew, English, and the date.
It's beautiful.
And everyone gets one, and should I take you through it?
Please do, I'd love to see it.
Whether I'm doing a cantorial piece, a wedding, a bris, or a Simchat Bat, I look at the ceremony as a musical phrase. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and they're tied together. So aesthetically, it appeals to my audience. So this starts with, and I'm going to give you just the highlights. Welcoming her into the community, the way we welcome a boy into the community at his bris. And then I do Psalm 113. Psalm 113 ends by thanking God for giving children to mothers. Okay, the last line says, He, meaning Hashem, sets the childless woman among her household as a happy mother of children. So already we are highlighting the mother. In a bris ceremony, the father is highlighted, and usually the grandfather is the sandak who holds the baby. In this case, the mother and the grandmothers are highlighted. And then, because this is not a covenantal ceremony, I bring in Devarim chapter 29, verses 13 and 14, which God says, I make this covenant and this oath with those who are here today and those who are not here today. God is referring, of course, to the giving of the Torah. But God uses the word covenant. And I explained that it's not just for those who were at Sinai, but for all future generations, including the beautiful baby girl. Then I give a midrash, which is from Shira Shirim Rabbah, in which God, you probably know the midrash, God says, present to me good guarantors, and I'll give you the Torah. And the Israelites, briefly, I'm giving you the overview of the midrash. The Israelites say, our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, they're our guarantors. And Hashem says, no, not good enough. And then the Israelites got together a second time and they say, our prophets, Moses, Miriam, Isaiah, Zechariah, Jeremiah. And God says, no. And then finally the Israelites get together a third time at the foot of Mount Sinai and they say, our children are our guarantors. Which harkens back to the verse in Devarim where God says, I make this covenant and this oath with you and all future generations, including children. So it's connected. Then I explain the importance of a Hebrew name, of a Shem Kolatch. There are 4 functions of a Hebrew name. The first is to give us understanding of the personality of the individual. So what's your Hebrew name?
Avital, same as my first name.
Right, exactly. So Avital means my God is dew, D-E-W, right?
Yeah.
Sustenance, in other words. God is giving sustenance. That tells me that you are a woman of great faith. That sustenance is not necessarily what you eat for dinner, but sustenance is a spiritual sustenance, and that you receive from God. Now, who is Avital in the Torah, in the Bible? Yeah, she was one of King David's wives.
Oh, how interesting.
Now, are you married, Avital?
I'm not.
Okay, but that tells me that you are going to marry someone who is of royal bearing, like King David was a wonderful king. You will marry someone who also is of wonder and great royal countenance.
Thank you.
So that's how the meaning of a child's name can affect the personality. The second function of a Hebrew name is to give us generational connectedness. So what's your Hebrew name again?
Avital.
That's half of it. What's the rest?
Oh, like Avital Bat. And then is it my father, my mother?
Sometimes people use both. It depends.
If it's my father, Avital Bat Davitzchak, or Avital Bat Talia.
Okay, so that's generational connectedness. You didn't give me your last name. You gave me your parents' names. That's generational connectedness. The third function of a Hebrew name is communal identification. What's the first thing you get when you join a soccer team, a baseball team? What do they give you?
Uniform, perhaps?
Yeah, a jersey, a name and a number. Our Hebrew name is our jersey, our communal identification. The rabbis teach us that when we were slaves in Egypt for 400 years, we kept our Israelite identity because we kept our Israelite names. And the fourth function of the Hebrew name is to give parents creativity. You may say, so what? We're creative every day. But let me try it from this angle. Who is the first person in the Bible?
Adam.
And what's the first thing he did independent of God? He named the beasts of the field, the birds of the sky, the plants, the fish, every living thing. And parents recreate that moment by naming their children. So the fourth function is creativity. So you can see naming is powerful. And then I end this section from Midrash Tanhuma, where God says a person is the Midrash says a person is given three names: the name that her parents call her, the name that her friends call her, like a nickname, and the name she earns herself throughout life. And of course, the rabbis all agree the most important of those is the name that she earns throughout life, her reputation. And then I bring in a piece from Pirkei Avot, which says that a person has three crowns. That the world has three crowns: the Keter Torah, the crown of the Torah, the crown of the Kahuna, the priesthood, and the crown of royalty. But the greatest crown of all is the Keter Shem Tov, the crown of a good name. Then I chant a part of Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, which talks about there is one perfect one, a dove, unique to her mother, the delight of her who bore her, royalty praise her, and so forth, speaking to the child. And I chant it in the chant of Shir HaShirim. And then we get to the naming. And the naming is taken from the Zeved Habat. The Zeved Habat is a Sephardic baby naming that is a quarter of millennia old. It's probably about 150 years old, but it's extremely forward thinking. So instead of saying our God and God of our fathers, this ceremony starts, this Mishaberach starts with may he who blessed our mothers, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, Miriam, the prophetess, Abigail, Esther, the queen, bless this darling baby, and in happy omen may her name be called. And then it goes on to say that the parents should see her happily married, a radiant mother of children, rich in honor, rich in joy, to a ripe old age. And I pause the ceremony, and I have one of the grandmothers light a candle. If it's Shabbat, I have her put a flower in a vase. And that is the candle for the past. And I start the ceremony, and I let the parents talk about for whom the child is named, the past. And I explain to them that it's best not to give a eulogy, but to talk about the wonderful characteristics and attributes that that person particularly had that we hope the child will inherit. Then I have the other grandmother light the second candle or put the flower in the vase for the present. That is, we honor all those who are present for the Simchat Bat. And having lit a candle for the past and the present, the child is the third light, the light of the future, right? So again, highlighting the grandmothers, not the grandfathers. Then I do Psalm 128, which is a psalm about family. And I usually have all of the baby's aunts and uncles read that. And then I have everyone join me in my favorite verse in the whole Tanakh, which is from Proverbs, Mishle, which says, grandchildren are the crown of their elders, and the glory of children is their parents, which takes some time to think about. But it's a beautiful, beautiful pasuk. Then I sing a song, the only modern part of this ceremony, really. I sing a song by Debbie Friedman called L'chila. You know that song?
I don't know that song, but I know Debbie Friedman. She's incredible.
Yeah, so this is a sweet song, which I won't bore you with now. And then we get to near the end of the ceremony, and we do the priestly blessing, the Birkat Shalom, which is the bracha that parents give on Friday nights when they bless their children, right? And I alternate. I do the Hebrew, and the parents do the English. And then I have a Talmudic story about an old man who was planting a carob tree. This story is told by the grandfathers. And the king rides by in his carriage and says, old man, what are you doing? And he says, I'm planting a carob tree. And he says, how long do you expect before that tree bears fruit? And the old man says, 70 years. And the king says, you're not going to be alive to eat that fruit. And the old man says, just as I found the world fruitful when I was born, so I plant trees for future generations, which is a metaphor for the moment. It's a metaphor for the Simchat Bat, planting the child in the soil of our people. Then we end with Shechianu, Siman Tov and Mazel Tov, and everyone eats. And that takes usually 20 or 25 minutes. Now, what's sort of unique at this moment in time is I've done a number of these, quite a few, on Zoom. What I do is I send the ceremony to the parents. They send it out to all of the participants or members of the family. And sometimes I do it from their living room. Sometimes I do it from my own living room. And we can do it anywhere in the world, actually. But it's a unique way during the pandemic to continue the tradition without everyone having to be in the same room and creating an obstacle for social distancing. And it's another way to get people on different continents. I had a bris last week, and there were people from Singapore, South Africa, and Israel, all at the same time, which never would have happened without Zoom.
That's incredible. It sounds like such a beautiful ceremony. I love the form that you and your wife put together. When I was trying to do research ahead of our interview, I couldn't really find anything about what happens at a Simchat Bat. So I'm learning too, and I thought it sounds so beautiful, and I love that it connects all these generations of women, past, present, future. It's really, really beautiful what you've designed.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. So you spoke about, as we were speaking, some of the potential possibilities for names for children, how, it's something that allows the parents to have creativity and to express their creativity, and you went through some of the reasons there. Something we haven't yet touched on is naming sort of after someone. So different types of Jews have different traditions as to who they name their child after, or, why. So perhaps you could talk a little bit about the different perspectives on if you name a child after someone, or if it's after biblical characters or inspirational figures throughout history. I'd love to hear about that.
Right. Well, in the Ashkenazi tradition, we name after someone usually in the family who's deceased. It only becomes complicated if, for instance, it's a baby boy and you want to name it after your great-grandmother, Razel. So we can look at Razel and say it means a rose. The masculine would be Shoshan or Herach, something like that. Or you can try and match the name, Razel. So there's a Hebrew name, Raziel, which means God is my secret, so another way to do it is meaning, and another way to do it is sound. Then there are people who name after significant figures in Jewish history. So I just had a baby boy we named Bader. That was his first name, Bader, after Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right? Which is certainly better than calling him Ruth.
Definitely.
Sometimes people have a hard time finding their grandfather's Hebrew name or Yiddish name. So I advise them to start by looking at their parents' ketubah, which is where it could be found, the tombstone, and there's now a way, I don't have it with me right now, but there is a website. There are people who have taken pictures of tombstones in Jewish cemeteries throughout the world. And oftentimes you can locate a loved one's tombstone without ever going to the cemetery anymore.
Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah. So that's the Ashkenazic tradition. The Sephardic tradition is to name after someone who's living, right? So it's generally the grandfather of the baby who gets named after. Not always, but generally. So those are the two varying traditions. And you can call upon either one.
That's great. And another thing that I saw as I was sort of preparing for this is that in the Talmud, which is, I suppose, the primary source for Jewish law, it said something to the effect of that God gives parents, I think it was 1/60th of a prophecy when naming a Jewish child, and that an angel will come and whisper to the parents what the name should be. If you could touch a little bit on that and why there might be a divine influence involved in the naming of a child.
Wow. Well, I can't speak to that particular section of the Talmud.
Sure.
But I think that if one looks at a child not as a possession, but as a trust, a gift that is a trust to be taken care of. The gift comes from Hashem, right? That there is, in fact, a spiritual component. The Talmud says there are three partners in the making of a child: God, the Holy One, the Father, and the Mother. Now, I'm not sure I would do it in that order, but a man wrote that. But the fact is that the rabbis sense the spirituality that Hashem is part of the creation, and when we recognize that, it has a much larger ripple effect, because we treat each other differently when we think that there is a spark of holiness in each of us. We treat each other with more respect, more care, more loving, more sensitivity. So when parents realize that God is part of that partnership, then they also realize that the child is that gift. And naming the child, whether it's a boy or a girl, is infused with that spirituality.
I love that answer. I think you touched on that very nicely in incorporating the different creators, so to speak, in a child's life and realizing the influence there. When another thing is, as for example, you were taking my name and the Hebrew meaning and the attributes of that name. So do you find that sometimes parents will think of attributes they want their child to have and then find a name surrounding that?
Sure. So someone, but we'll stay with the same theme. Someone feels that they want to thank God, that the child is a gift of God. They call him Natan, or Netanel, or Matan, meaning gift or gift of God. And then you just feminize it, Matana.
Oh, that's very nice.
So yeah, people pick, or we want, we've just gone through a difficult period in the United States, and truth, alternate set of facts has taken hold, and they want to emphasize that there is truth in the world. They call the child Emet.
That's very cool. It's very cool to see, like if you take your own name, I don't know what your Hebrew name is, but have you seen, looking at your name and reflecting on it, aspects that connect back to the meaning of your name?
I don't as much as reflecting back on my grandfather for whom I was named.
That's really interesting.
That's more of an emphasis for me. My Hebrew name is Mordechai Yitzchak. Mordechai was, of course, the hero, the secondary hero. He was Esther is clearly the heroine of the story. But Mordechai was wise, and Yitzchak means laughter. And I think that it's a good combination, wisdom, but not taking yourself too seriously, adding a dose of laughter. So I'm hoping that those were attributes of my grandfather for whom I never had the honor of meeting, but at least I can carry on his name.
Absolutely. And so far, I'm just meeting you, but I have laughed and I see that you have wisdom. So it seems like the perfect combination to me.
Thank you.
How does a parent decide, let's say they've determined a name, be it Hebrew or English, let's say they have the English name and want to come up with a Hebrew name, how do they go ahead and determine what that Hebrew name might be?
Well, as we said, they're either matching the secular name, like if they're going to call him Jonathan, they give the child Yonatan, or David, David, or Asher is Asher, Aiden is Aiden. Liam is also not just an Irish name, but it's also a Hebrew name. So sometimes we match the secular name to the holy name, and sometimes we name after someone. But those are the two basic ways to do it.
That's very interesting.
Let me recommend to your audience a book or an author. This author has written one book, but it's got 5 different
volumes,
names. Oh. Yeah. His name is Alfred Kolatch, Kolatch. This one is called The Complete Dictionary of English and Hebrew First Names.
Wow.
I have another one here by him called The New Name Dictionary.
Okay.
And there's a number of others that they're all the same book with different names.
Okay, good to know. Well, that's a great recommendation. Thank you.
But that if parents want to do some research, they'll find this book in the public library, or at a secular bookstore. It's often in the Jewish section. And it's generally my go-to book.
That sounds like a great recommendation. Thank you so much. I'll definitely leave the information for that in the description below as well. So you've had the pleasure of being a part of so many life cycle events as a mohel and also in doing the Simchat Bat ceremony. How has that, if it has, influenced you and your perception or perspective on life? Have you gained any, as we spoke about your name being wisdom, have you learned any insights into life or a new perspective based off of partaking in so many of these celebrations?
Wow. Well, as I said earlier, it's a really it's a bracha to be part of people's lives. And many of the families, I've done about 15,000 Britot. Many of the, and I have record of each one. Many of those families are long-time relationships. I build long-time relationships. I've done these kids b'nai mitzvah. I've married some of them. And I've done brises for some of their children. So it's an arc to which I'm privileged to be at the beginning, the middle, and the end, like we talked about a musical phrase. When someone calls me and said, Cantor Kushner, you taught me my bar mitzvah, we just had a son. The first question is, God, I hope I was a good teacher. I didn't yell at you. I didn't embarrass you. But it's influenced me in that it helps me see the bigger picture. That the day-to-day things that often drag us down are fleeting, and that life from infancy to death. It's sometimes people call me and they'll say, "You did Leo's bris. My grandfather just died. Would you do his funeral?" So I have relationships with these people that span a lifetime, my lifetime, and allows me to really view a bigger picture of things, and God's hand throughout that arc.
That's so beautiful. You said that very, very well. It sounds like an incredible thing to watch all of these Jewish families grow and develop and generations to continue. It certainly, I would imagine, does give you a perspective on life and the life cycle. That's very cool. Do you ever see yourself retiring, or this is something you want to do long term?
Eventually, I think retirement is mandatory for a while. I hope God gives me the signal as to when that time should be. But right now, I feel pretty much at the top of my game. And things are just starting to get back to normal in terms of the number of people calling me. So it's been a slow year, 2020, in terms of Britot, and I'm really excited to get back, get busy, to be part of people's lives. It's no fun having to wear a mask, and I wear a medical grade gown now, cover my shoes. It is in many ways a barrier between me and my families, which I don't enjoy, but it's a necessity. It's a necessary evil. And God has kept me healthy during this period. And so retirement, I'm sure, is in view, but not at the top of my agenda at this moment.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that you're not retiring anytime soon, because it seems like you have had an incredible career at this, and 15,000, that's just a number that's kind of mind-boggling. So I hope you have a long, healthy life and make many, many more Britot.
Thank you, Vital.
Absolutely. Is there anything else that I'm missing that you'd like to add or share with our viewers?
I would just say that during this dark period, that you shouldn't be afraid to have a bris or a Simchat Bat. That is a ray of light in this dark moment. It is who we are as Jews. From the time of Pharaoh, we kept the covenant in difficult situations during the Crusades, during Nazi Germany, during the Soviet Union, where it was illegal for 10 Jews to be in one room together, but we did it. And we shouldn't let the virus stop us. Doesn't mean we shouldn't be careful, doesn't mean we shouldn't follow safety protocols, but we as Jews have persevered, and I urge my families to continue. Having a bris at home is far safer than having it in the hospital, where the virus is much more prevalent, exposure is much more prevalent than it is in our homes. That we should stand up and be proud and courageous Jews as we have been for millennia. And it also is a way to give nachas to your family at difficult times. We all crave happiness and contentment. And families who've just given birth can bestow that upon their family and friends by continuing the tradition.
That's a very beautiful message. It is very true throughout the centuries with persecution and other things that it has been a right that we've had to fight to keep, and it really does bind us with Jews going all the way back to, like you said, to Pharaoh, to the time of Abraham. And so that's a very beautiful message. If anybody is looking for a great mohel or someone to do a Simchat Bat in the Delaware, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey area, somewhere in between, Cantor Kushner is a great person to go to. Thank you so much again for taking the time today. I should mention that your website, also it's cantork.com. Thank you so much again for joining us and for taking the time to teach us.
Truly my honor, my privilege.
Thank you.